learning Rambam. What was the last halacha we mentioned here? Said that with the Rambam, he's maneach the prusa. The Rambam has this concept in Chameitz and Umatzah, this 8th parak, the 6th halacha. It's the bottom of the first page, I think. Yeah, we're in the last halacha there. The Rambam says that he takes maneach parus l'tok shalem, and that's how he used to say the blessing. And I mentioned that there are those who read in the Rambam that because matzah is lechem oni, and because the verse explicitly says that we are to eat the matzah actually 7 days, then you're supposed to make sure that your matzah is lechem oni 7 days. Now, Chazal have a few shots in lechem oni. The most basic one is that it has to have poor ingredients. That is, matzah can be made many ways. As long as you take your grains and you make them into flour, and you make what Chazal call pas or a tavshil, but you do not allow it to rise, then you have something that's halachically matzah. So you could take the same flour and mix it with oils and juices and eggs and get a matzah, as long as it's not leavened, except that's a matzah shiro. Matzah lechem oni means matzah made purely with water. At least that's the way most Rishonim understand it. The Rambam actually has 3 standards. The Rambam says, really, there's certain things don't make it, not everything makes it rich. If you were to make a matzah out of eggs and apple juice, let's say Manischewitz style, they use eggs and apple juice to make their matzahs. They're so-called egg matzahs. Then that's still not a matzah shira according to the Rambam. It only becomes matzah shira specifically if you put in things like wine and oil. Okay, real richness. If it's just eggs and other fruit juices, it's not a matzah shira. Everybody else disagrees. The nafkamina is they all say it doesn't leaven.
You did it so quickly.
So it's technically kosher for Passover. It's just you can't use something that's rich for your obligation to have lechem oni. Another factor of oni is that it's broken. It's not whole. So there's no lechem mishneh all Passover long. Even Shabbos Chol Hamoed, you're supposed to have lechem mishneh. So according to the way they read the Rambam, you're supposed to break those matzahs also before the blessing. No full lechem mishneh because it's supposed to be lechem oni. There's also all sorts of fascinating ideas that the Rambam has here about making matzah. There's also nafkamina with matzah shira that we'll talk about, God willing, next time Passover starts on a Sunday. We'll speak about that. Okay, so that's when he starts it here, lechem oni. Notice the Rambam doesn't hold the halacha that you break the matzah before magid. Why? There is an idea in the Gemara that lechem oni is from the meaning aniyah, which doesn't mean poor. It means answering. La'anot means to answer in Hebrew. So a person's supposed to break the matzah and make it poor before beginning to answer the child's questions, basically at the beginning of Magid. Rambam doesn't hold of that lahalacha. Lechem oni describes the matzah, so it's poor bread. How is it poor? It doesn't have rich ingredients, and it is broken. Does that make sense? Okay. There's a thing, if I had a chumash here, does anyone have a chumash? You all have chumashim? Oh, there was something, because this is, in the beginning of Psachim, oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. Ooh, wow. Little Salsino, yeah, real classic. I like it how this commentary often makes reference to the situation in Palestine. The Salsino, yeah, the Hertz one. This is from the 1930s, so it makes reference to the situation in Palestine. Okay, remember back in the 1930s, proud Palestinians meant they're good Jews. So this verse is actually, most people are familiar with how Tosfos parses this verse. The Tosafists claimed that one could only eat matzah. Let's say you took in Passover early. Passover starts on Shabbos. Normally, we gather here, I don't know, sometime before sunset, we'll take in Shabbos. And during the summer, people even end up at home. They say Kiddush, and they're going to eat their Shabbos meal while the sun is still shining, right? Early Shabbos. You could do that technically. What about Yontif? Can you do an early Yontif? Why is Yontif different from Shabbos? The Tosafists have a Kiddush that is not unanimous, but even though nowadays people think it is unanimous, the implied opinion of the Rif and the Rambam always was that you could take in Passover early and begin the eating of the matzah early, just like you take in any other holiday early. That's a Kiddush. The Shulchan Aruch brings an even bigger chumrah that even Kiddush, the first cup has to be after the stars come out. You've seen that. That's why everybody says it. That is a far from unanimous idea, especially because the proof text that the Tosafists bring to this position doesn't say what they claim it says. As a matter of fact, it says what the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon say it says. The pasuk is in we're going to read in Parshas HaChodesh. Sorry, we read this in Parshas HaChodesh. We're going to read this in Parshas HaChodesh. We just read a few weeks ago in Parshas Bo. It says here, Barishon, Bar Ba'asar Yom LaChodesh Ba'erev. I stopped there because that's where the Zakef is. It says on the first month, on the 14th day of that month, in the even. Now, what day was that? Did I say the 15th or the 14th? It says the 14th Ba'erev, Tochelu Masot, Ad Yom HaChad V'Esrim LaChodesh Ba'arev, until the 21st day in the evening. So that means, if this is the mitzvah to eat matzah, it says starting in the Erev until 7 days later. Very clearly, it's saying that there is a commandment to continue eating the matzahs all 7 days long. And indeed, that's the opinion that the Vilna Gaon points out. The Rambam, every time you eat matzah on Passover, you don't say the blessing, who's commanded us to eat matzah, but there's a fulfillment of this obligation. So much so that the Vilna Gaon himself made sure to have a nice shalosh shudas on the 7th day of Passover in order to get in one last chance to do this mitzvah. The Vilna Gaon himself brings a proof from other halachas regarding Passover that there's no such thing as shalosh shudas on Yontif. Does anybody here have shalosh shudas on Yontif? Yeah. No, let's say it's not Shabbos. The Rambam very clearly says why should Yontif be any different than any other Shabbos? We have Lechem Mishnah, we have Kiddush. You're supposed to have shalosh shudas also on every Yontif. The Vilna Gaon says it's implied in the Mishnah in Meiser Sheni that there is no such thing as shalosh shudas on a Yontif. Okay, he learns that from what the Mishnah describes they used to do on the 7th day of Passover. And even though the Vilna Gaon then brings this proof text that there is no such thing as shalosh shudas on Yontif, and we learned that from the 7th day of Passover, we then have reported, and the Vilna Gaon himself had shalosh shudas on the 7th day of Passover, like the Rambam. So, Neil okay, Neil, okay. At the end of it's the third meal on that day. Okay, yeah, make sure to have another meal on Yontif. The Vilna Gaon is teaching us that even if you hold, like you said with Tosfos Yontif and Tosefes Yontif and Tosefes Shabbos, the Vilna Gaon shows it's not an obligation unless it's Yom Kippur, like the Rambam says. Aval mitzvah ika, but it's still a mitzvah. It's not an obligation, but there's a go out of rate. So I'm not obligated to wear tzitzis, but I'm wearing tzitzis right now. That's how we do it. We want to keep more commandments. So that's what the Vilna Gaon is teaching us. 2 lessons right there. But look over here. The Tosafos read this and say, Ba'erev tochelu masot. They read the pasuk. It says Ba'erev tochelu masot. Eat the matzahs in the evening, which means you got to wait for nightfall. That's how they read it. But I just read it here. Barishon ba'arbasar lachodesh ba'erev. It says on the 14th ba'erev. It's the 14th. If it was the 15th ba'erev, that makes sense. What does the 14th ba'erev mean? When we talk about not only that, it seems to be that pasuk is similar to what it says about fasting on Yom Kippur. What does it say about Yom Kippur? It says, "B'tish'a lachodesh ba'erev, may erev ad erev tishbesu Shabbat lechem." That's one day. So when does Yom Kippur start? It says on the 9th ba'erev tishbesu Shabbat lechem until the next erev. It means night to night, and it is an obligation, unanimous obligation. In a few places in Shas, because I'll bring that pasuk with regards to Yom Kippur, and they say it means you have to start your Yom Kippur sometime before the day actually starts. It is not sufficient to say it's Yom Kippur now, right at sundown. You have to make sure to accept your Yom Kippur sometime before sundown. That's called Tosefes Yom Kippur. That's what the pasuk means on the 9th. Because I'll wonder, why the 9th? Isn't Yom Kippur the 10th? No, on the 9th, as it's getting late on the 9th, that's when you accept the 10th. So too, if the pasuk here says on the 14th ba'erev, begin to eat your matzahs until the 21st on the erev, and that means go until the end of the 21st. It means that you can also have this issue of Tosefes Pesach, and you start eating your matzahs when you have that time of Tosefes Pesach. That is the implied position of the Rishonim who lived before the Tosefis. And also that's what the pasuk says, at least according to our tradition, because it says Barishon ba'arba'asar yom lachodesh ba'erev, pause, tochelu matzot. At this time, eat matzah. Doesn't just mean ba'erev tochelu matzot. That would change the trop. That would also beg the question, what do you do with the beginning of this verse? So I was surprised. I saw there was a big sefer. Many achronim say there's no way around this. You have to tell people you can only manage to eat your matzahs once the sun goes down, or at least, or even nightfall, which is sometime later. I tried to tell them you have to look at the Rishonim, the way they understood this, and look at the pasuk. It is fairly clear that in the olden days they used to accept Yontif much earlier, and they used to also perhaps eat their matzah earlier. If you have Korban Pesach, that's a different issue. Korban Pesach definitely has to be eaten after sundown, but you could start your Seder. Many of us start our Seder much later than they would have in Chazal's times or the Shulchan Aruch times. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet you that at this synagogue, they will only begin Mariv well after sundown. So you'll be starting your Seders maybe an hour or so. What?
And say hello.
Yeah, and say Hallel, which is also kind of strange, right? Well, it's a delay tactic? I don't think so, but whatever. I still think that you guys remember in America we didn't say Hallel, right? It's a Sephardic. No, it depends on the shul. Ashkenazim didn't do it. It's a Sephardic minhag.
Some Ashkenaz, there was one Ashkenaz shul in Toronto that says hello.
Yeah, were they illiterate? Were they illiterate? So where did? Because we're not going to be talking Leil HaSeder. Why is there a mitzvah? Why do people say Hallel and shul on Leil Pesach?
Because you say hello at the Seder.
So you say Hallel, so I don't have to say it in the shul. Here's the takana. You're supposed to say Hallel when you eat your korban Pesach or you have your Seder. That's the takana. It's chiddush because normally Hallel is not said at night. So that's the takana's chazal. The Rishalmi points out that at certain times and places, the people were mostly illiterate, let's say. They could not be trusted to, especially after eating 3 cups of wine and being home for a few hours, to then have the wherewithal to properly recite Hallel. Therefore, they started saying Hallel while they're still in synagogue as part of Mariv. So that minhag exists. It's existed in different times and places throughout Jewish history. So, okay, that could be the takana. But I was trying to explain why people would say it in the synagogue and not at home with the Seder. So this is something I'm surprised. I'm surprised that many Ashkenazic types do like the Israeli minhag, which is not the Vilna Gaon's minhag. It's certainly not minhag Ashkenaz. Yeah. Okay. So to each his own. But I think it's certainly better to take an early Passover. The problem with this, someone says, yeah, but you should be machmir. Be machmir. Wait a while to eat your matzahs. If you are machmir for this, you're being extra makel with involving, let's say the children and the elderly in the Passover Seder. So you have to take your pick what your chumrah is going to be. Every chumrah leads to a kula and vice versa. The 7th halacha, which is on the top page, we see here that the Rambam said, once again, like I put in the like in the Haggadah, there's actually an option over here. Are you going to have your matzah and maror separate, or are you going to make them into a sandwich? The Rambam describes the chatchila sandwiching the matzah and the maror. Why? Because the sages disagreed with Hillel. Hillel made a sandwich of all 3. He put his Pesach, matzah, and maror in one sandwich. Rabbi Yochanan says that, with all due respect to Hillel, it's not the way you're allowed to do it. You can only combine 2 mitzvahs. When we don't have korban Pesach, we don't even need a sandwich, lahalacha. If you were to eat korech l'chachila at a korban Pesach-less seder, then you would not be fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah or maror, or you wouldn't be fulfilling the mitzvah of maror, mitzvah, because the matzah would overpower the maror. Or the maror is stronger, yeah, but the matzah is a doraisa mitzvah. The maror is just a derabbanan. Once the maror is now a doraisa mitzvah once again, because korban Pesach is on the table, you have 2 doraisa mitzvahs. Neither overpowers the other, and you could combine them. And that's what the Rambam says. Al matzot u'rorim yokaluhu means you shall eat the korban Pesach after you've had some matzah and maror. It doesn't literally mean on, like Hillel said. It means al, like al hasova. What does al hasova means? Once you've gotten satiety, then you eat the korban Pesach. So it's also eaten al matzot u'rorim. The first thing you start with is matzah and maror, and you could technically eat them together. So I think this would be actually kind of fun because I've eaten matzah and I've eaten maror, but I've never made a sandwich thereof and said one bracha thereon at once. So God willing, this year we'll do that the first time. We'll do like the Rambam. We'll make a matzah maror sandwich, dip that, and just once. It also means you'll be eating half as much matzah and maror. If you're the type that looks very closely, you bring a scale to the table or a chart, and you actually measure how much matzah and maror you are going to be eating. Then just to know, if korban Pesach is on the table, instead of eating matzah, maror, and then korech and doing it all over again, it's just matzah and maror, or matzah then maror, but once. So you eat less. The Rambam describes here what you find in your Haggadahs. In the 8th halacha, he says, minhag art scroll. Okay, let's go to the 9th halacha. Rachakach nimshach b'suda, v'ochel kol shehut rotzeh lechol, v'shoteh kol shehu rotzeh lishtot. Important because you would have thought maybe you just should eat what the Torah says to eat this night and only drink that which the sages said to drink, the 4 cups. Kamash Balan, a person could drink even more wine during the meal. Water doesn't count. Also, that's the halacha. When it talks about the last thing you eat is, let's say, afikomen or the matzah, You could still drink water. You could still brush your teeth, and should still floss. If you've eaten meat, please make sure to floss before you go to bed, at least. Why? But it's good for you, and it's not going to result in, it's going to save your teeth. It doesn't mean you have to have some food stuck in your mouth so you taste it all the time. It means the last thing that you ate, you feel in your kishkas, is the mitzvah food. Okay? It doesn't mean that you can't clean yourself. Okay? It's not about that. What was the question?
Drinking wine with milk.
Yeah.
I was also understood to try and avoid that so that you have the last two cuts coming off.
Yeah. If you should be smart, Chachamin of the Rosho, don't get yourself so shikker that you can't even bench. You know?
You got a mix.
Yeah, you have a mitzvah, but you're saying if a person can handle his wine. By the way, the Rambam assumes you're drinking diluted wine. That's another thing. Rambam, it comes out the calculations. It's about 20 ml of wine per cup. That's not a lot. Huh? Yeah. You've already been told this, right? That the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch assumed that they didn't have more powerful wine back in the day. That was Rashi's guess. It's a physical impossibility, though. Okay. You're surprised? Okay. Raise your hands if you've never heard this before.
Say this, I didn't-
Here's how it goes. Rashi
Yes.
lived in France
Yeah.
in the 1000s.
Right.
Rashi sees that the sages always describe in many places diluting one's wine as a part. So Rashi wondered why that is, and Rashi suggested that it must be they had more powerful wine back in the day.
Let me, more powerful, be more.
Whatever it was, it needs to be a diluted sticker or something, maybe perhaps more alcoholic. But the Eastern rabbis, like Maimonides and the Shulchan Aruch, assume, even in their codes, that Hilchos Kiddush, Birkas Hamazon, 4 kosos, we dilute our wine. Why? Because they don't hold like Rashi. They say you're supposed to dilute your wine. And it turns out there's a physical property here, just like we have old olive trees. Rabbi Dov Lior and Rabbi Ariel talk about this, the old-fashioned rabbis. They say you can find olive trees in and around Jerusalem, up north, 1,000-year-old olive trees. Every year they give the same size olives. Nothing changed about olives. In Europe, they were wondering, maybe olives have changed size, but they didn't have olives. So now we see the olive trees. In a lean year, the tree gives the same size olives, except less of them. And in a good year, it gives the same size olives, just more than them. But the olives themselves have not changed their size. They're always the same olives. Grapes have not really changed in all these thousands of years, and the nature of wine is always the same. Wine ferments, has a certain percentage of alcohol and a certain percentage of sugar, and that's how it always was. If you were to try to, let's say, thicken your wine, concentrate it more, well, what happens? The same process that removes water from wine, let's say, also removes the what? The alcohol. Even more so, alcohol has a lower boiling point than water. So nowadays, how do we get powerful drinks? Whiskey, vodka.
Add alcohol.
What?
You add alcohol. Then you like port, but that wine cannot be more than 15% alcohol.
I know. Yes, yeah.
Anybody who makes wine told me.
Yeah.
I know a couple of friends of mine, the maximum amount of alcohol you can get is 18%.
Well, okay. Well, you have to really do a trick like that.
Rare, but you can.
No, I was asking.
Facts, facts.
Yes. So they have their maximum. We normally go into the store, you could see that they have a certain amount. Rambam measured his wine. Also, this is due to, I used to think that wine should be denser than water because there's more things dissolved in the water, right? Wine should have greater density, just like cola and other juices are denser than water. Grape juice is denser than water. Wine is less dense than water. Why? Because the same processes that destroy the sugars cause some of it to evaporate away. The alcohol has a lot lower density than the water. So a mixture of water and alcohol is less dense. And the Rambam has actually measurements about this. So how do we get, I was talking about whiskey. How do you get real powerful drinks? Because I'll never had that. That's made from distillation. Distillation is a technology. It's not like a technology like this computer or an airplane, but it's a technology nonetheless that is later than Chazal, and that's how they got more alcoholic drinks. But in the olden days, there was a limit to how alcoholic you can make it, and that is why the Shulchan Aruch in 3 places does not hold like Rashi. He talks about diluting his wine. The Rambam assumes that Revius, the minimum cup, is no more than 86 ml. Some calculations put it at 76. Rabbi Rabinovich said it's 76, but you could look in the parish, Rabbi Rabinovich, in Ma'ale Adumim, of blessed memory. Yeah. Rabbi Rabinovich's opinion was 76 ml in the Rambam. Yes, it's less than 4 ounces. However, if it's quite little. However,
Well, really, 1 ounce is 28.9296.
good.
early amount is 1 ounce.
Good, okay.
Like 76, you've got just over.
That's fine. I keep these cups around my house, but that's Rabinovich's measurement. Bar-Hayim says the same thing. However, you look in the Parish of Mishnayos, the Rambam says that he measured revius of wine and it came out to a certain mass. He measured it with drams, that old Egyptian mass. And a dram is about 3 grams. And he says it comes out to about 26 or so. Okay, no, more than 29 drams or something like that. 3 times 29 drams comes out to about 86 ml. Rav Chaim Noah says the Rambam's revius is 86 ml. Gematria kos. That's how I remember it. Gematria of kos is 86. So yeah, you use ml. Either way, even if you hold this maximum 86 ml, like the Rambam seems to describe in his own handwriting, we have the handwriting, you see it. Rambam says this. He just uses a different terminology. If you're doing like the Rambam says, a quarter of 86 in higher mathematics is 21 and a half. Okay, 21 and a half ml of wine diluted isn't that much. That makes it a lot easier. So just to know you have that. And the Rambam holds, la halacha, grape juice is just as wine. So you basically only need 86 ml of pure grape juice to get yourself through a Seder. Just eat, 1/4 with each cup. So you don't have to go crazy with this drinking, at least according to the Rambam. So he says here, afterwards, he finished with the Korban Pesach. Yes, he's eating Korban Pesach, and he also finishes with Korban Pesach. I think I asked you this question. What's the Rambam getting at over here? You eat a zayas of matzah instead of the missing Korban Pesach. What are the 2 questions I asked? First is, why should I eat something instead of it? I don't have it, so I gave the mushal. Fellow doesn't have his tefillin, so he'll wear more tzitzis. Okay, so or any other mitzvah for that matter. I never saw that one mitzvah compensates for another. There's no concept like this in Judaism. Further, we do have a concept that with regards to sacrificial matters, there is a substitute sometimes, b'diavad, and that is the recitation and the study of the relevant passages. For example, ketores. We didn't have ketores this morning in the Beis Hamikdash. What did they do in the synagogues to make up for that as an attempt? They read Pitum Aktores. Pitum Aktores is a scriptural passage plus Talmudic passages, right? Tells you how to bring the ketores. Very good. There's some who have now, they write it out on cloth. I think it's funny. It's Torah Sheba'al Peh. They write out the Brisa on cloth as though it's Tanakh. A little bit strange. There's no such thing as writing down Brisas on cloth. There's no dinim because it's supposed to be Torah Sheba'al Peh. Whatever. Well, it's a skula. Oh, maybe I should do it then. If it's a skula, I should, okay. Well, yes, that's exactly what it says. In Shalom Farms and there's also the lesson of Bris Be'an Basarim from Avraham Avinu. He wondered, on what merit would he get the land of Israel? And God said, Kichali, Egla, take me all these animals. The 5 animals he uses korbanos. And then he asked God, and what about if I can't bring korbanos? And the answer is, so you study this passage, Imru Lefanai. So say it like that. There's only one type of korban according to Rabbi Akiva where you don't have to do it like you could do it just like they did in the Beis Hamikdash, because what we do today is exactly what they used to do. Yeah, there's one like that, which is Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros. We do Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros on Rosh Hashanah just like they used to do in the olden days. Nothing's changed. That's where we'll see that before Rosh Hashanah. Okay, and he talks about the hollow over here. Birkat Hamazon, everybody knows what that is, and he drinks on the 3rd cup, and he drinks it. Once again, the Rambam did not say here, but this is understood. Normally, when we have Birkat Hamazon in a group, one holds the cup, and he's the only one who drinks. Or something gives it to the Chasam and Challah. Okay, fine, but not that everybody has to have a cup with their Birkat Hamazon. The Chiddush here is everybody has. Yes, sir. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he says,
Okay. Yes. During the meal, yeah, he could drink more. He just has to be smart. Save some for the official third cup and the fourth cup. What makes something a ceremonial cup apparently is that there's a bracha attached to it. You notice it's not just put down 4 cups. Every time you drink one of the cups, there's another blessing. So there's Kiddush cup, Gal Yisrael or Sur Yisrael Goalo or Goel Yisrael, drink a cup. Birkat Hamazon, drink a cup. Halel, drink a cup. It's not their ceremonial act, and it's done. It has to be rinsed. Every one of these cups, by the way, there's something important that people forget about. A cup for Birkas Hamazon, Shefa Brachas, Kiddush needs to be rinsed beforehand. Hadacha mibafnim ubibachutz, right? So technically speaking, if you drank your cup of wine for the first cup, you can't just refill it for the second. It's kos shel bracha, so you should be rinsing it out, in and out between cups. There's some who drink the cup. They just drink a little bit. They don't finish it for whatever reason. So they just add more for the second cup. That's a little bit not right. You should drink the whole cup and then rinse it. What? Pagum, they say. You drank from that cup. It's considered pagum. Yeah. So it makes it not pagum, but you still don't have that. You still didn't rinse it between uses. Also, it's important to have hygiene. I don't know. They're chayiv just like you and me. Vegetarians are people too, and they're all just as obligated in the commandments. A vegetarian's obligated to eat meat on Yom Tov. Don't tell them that, but yeah. Every Yom Tov there's a mitzvah to eat from the Shalmei Chagiga and the other korbanos brought on Yom Tov. Even women. It's an obligation of a man when he goes on pilgrimage to share the Yom Tov meat of the korban with his wife and family, and some with the Levi and the widow and the orphan and the pauper. That's a mitzvah. They all have to eat some meat on Yom Tov. If you're outside the temple, the eating of meat on Yom Tov is just a mitzvah for men. So if you're a vegetarian man, you have to eat meat on Yom Tov. Look, if someone wants to be a vegetarian, that's his own decision, but he should just know that he could be vegetarian all year round. But when it comes to Korban Pesach, he can't pull that shtick. Also, if he wants to be a Kohen can claim he's a vegetarian all year round. When it comes to being in the temple, it's his turn to eat the chatas. He can't say, you know what, I'm a vegetarian. He has to eat the chatas. It's his obligation. It's his sacred duty because it's klanim ochlim, bailim is kaprim. Part of the kapara that the owner of the korban, the one who brought the korban for the sin, achieves is by the Kohen eating that meat. So a Kohen should not be refusing. And I guess he should resign from his kahuna if he wants to be a vegetarian. Chazal never had such a concept. Not saying you should be eating meat all the time. I think one should be like the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon. A person could say, you know what, I have determined that someone who wants to be holy should not drink wine, should not be eating meat, should be celibate, let's say. Kamash Balan, really a Talmud Chacham, if he avoids meat, wine, and intimacy all week long, that's fine. But on Shabbos, he's actually bidden to do so. And our great sages and those who came after them lived this themselves. The Vilna Gaon was basically a vegetarian during the week. The Vilna Gaon didn't drink wine. The Vilna Gaon barely slept. But on Shabbos, he did what the Torah says. Like the Rambam says, that's the Shavil Zahav. Dial Adam, it's sufficient to eat meat from Shabbos to Shabbos. Erev Shabbos to Shabbos, he says. Shabbos night, you could do this, and that actually leads to better health. Doesn't mean you have to drink wine all the time. So, some moderation. If a person just says, I'm not going to eat meat, I think someone who says, I'm never going to eat meat, period, is basically taking like a vow of celibacy, which for some people that works, but that's not human. That's not normal. Okay. So the Rambam continues. Well, the Nazir is different. A Nazir So a Nazir doesn't drink wine. A Nazir, though, however, doesn't avoid meat and doesn't avoid, let's say, being. He's not a celibate, right? And a Nazir is how long? 30 days. A Nazir, Stam Nazir is 30 days. If a person wants to go longer than that, that's his own problem. But that's not what the Torah said. Nazir is okay, maybe 30 days, twice being a Nazir. That's fine. But he's not going to be a complete. Take on Nazirus right after Sukkot. That's fine. Take on a 3-month Nazirus after Sukkot. You're fine. You still won't have a problem. Oh, what are you going to drink on Passover? Okay. What was it? Someone said something here? No. Okay. Let's continue. And v'achar kach moseg kos revi v'chomer allow et hahalel v'chomer allow birkat hashir v'hui yihaluch Hashem Elokeinu kol ma'asecha No, what's the Rambam? What's the Chiddush over here? He's supposed to say Hallel, and he says it with Hallel Birkat Ashir. Why? Normally, Birkat Ashir is not part of Hallel necessarily. The Rambam claims Birkat Ashir is Yahalalucha, that which we say normally every time we say Hallel. Already in the Gemara, there are those who disagree. And what's the Chiddush? Every time you say Hallel, there's Birkat Ashir. It must be that this Birkat Ashir is not the one Chazal were describing to be said the night of Passover. So what is Birkat Ashir? Nishmas. Okay, Nishmas is longer. It ends with Yishtabach. Some combine the both of them. They say Yahalucha first, then Nishmas, or Nishmas and Yishtabach, and then Yahalucha. You've probably seen a few Machzorim have that. According to Nusach Ashkenaz, the classic one, the Vilna Gaon says it's just Nishmas. Where does Nishmas come from? We heard some fascinating ideas. They say that was written by Saint Peter, of all people. You heard this one? Professor Lyman says this. Oh, you heard the whole svara? There are some who claim, and this seems to be proof from this, the early Christians were basically Jews. They were a radical group within Jews. And eventually it became that Christianity was mostly a Gentile movement. What changed? So the first pope was a fellow they call St. Peter. He was one of the apostles. There is a claim among rabbinic Jews that he was really just one of the Tanaim, Rabbi Shimon in disguise, who took the Christians and gave them all these radical ideas and founded a church in Rome so that it would be, separate them from Judaism. And then when his undercover operation was over, he came back. And then he wrote Nishmas. Kach is the legend I've heard. There's others who say it slightly differently. That's why it's known as Shimon Peter. Peter is just the Latin name for a person with the name of Evan or Tzur. Tzur is a Hebrew name. There's some good Tzurs in the Torah and some bad Tzur. Okay, just like there's good Chur and there's bad Chur. Okay, so right, that's what they say it is. I wasn't there, so I can't tell you. But that's allegedly the source of Nishmas. And Chazal said one should say this as part of his Hallel. And after that, shouldn't be eating anything else, but he could drink water. The Ram's opinion is always that when you have an Isser to eat or drink, it does not apply to water, even before Kiddush. So machlokes, Friday night, one's accepted Shabbos. Now he's thirsty. Can he drink water? We normally say, Shulchan Aruch holds, you have to make Kiddush first. Kiddush first, it has to be that cup of Kiddush. And the Rambam says it could be water because water doesn't count. The problem is the Yerushalmi seems to say, they actually asked this question. Someone asked, I'm thirsty, can I just drink a little water before Kiddush? And he said, no, it has to be the grape juice. But in the morning, you could definitely drink water beforehand. Everybody holds you could drink water. And then we have opinion of the Rush that once one's finished, he shouldn't drink water, which is a little bit difficult. Rambam says you could drink water before davening, you could drink water before Kiddush, no matter how long. You could drink water here. The Yeshlo Libzog Kos Chamishi. Oh, who's ever done a fifth cup?
Not yet.
Yeah, you've done it? Not yet? Well, Rabbi Rosen said to do it. He was a Tzomet rabbi in the Gush. He used to read they used to get Shabbat b'Shabbatot, maybe even in the shul before he passed away. And Rabbi Kasher used to say, do this, the fifth cup. It's not obligated. It's like a Tosefes mitzvah. Once again, a person could do even more mitzvah, drink a fifth cup. Nowadays, we have a cup shel Eliyahu, which a lot of people don't drink. That's a little bit of a waste. You pour a cup of wine and you just let it go to waste. That's a waste. So, yeah. Yeah.
Would help. Everybody would get a little bit from it
Okay.
for the next class.
Okay. My father-in-law would save kos shel Yahu for Kiddush the next morning. Yeah, but he's Sephardic, so I don't know if he could learn anything from that. What? Yeah. Okay. So it's good. Don't waste the cup. But here he says kos chamishi. Don't leave it for Elio Anavi. I bring the ma'isa of my own great grandfather, who Rav Shechter says you shouldn't teach kids that Elio Anavi comes and drinks from the cup. That's above ma'isa according to him. You've heard Rav Shechter say that. Rav Shechter compared it to like the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. You shouldn't do that. However, my great grandfather was well known for his chassidus and his piety, and they say that you could actually see like the wine go down in his cup. And there are still older gentlemen here in Jerusalem who are aware of this ma'aseh. So I still do the kos shel Yahu. It says on the fifth cup. What does he say with the fifth cup? Halal Hagadol. Halal Hagadol is the hodus. It's in your Haggadah, but we attach it to Hallel instead. We put it before Birkas Ashir. But instead, no, you're supposed to put Halal Gadol there. V'hu mehodul Hashem kitov, which is Tehillim Kuf Lamed Vav, until Al Naros Bavel. He's basically describing Kapitel Kuf Lamed Vav. It's not a chova, it's not obligation like the first 4 cups. So the Rambam doesn't say it the way we say it in Lumdish language, but it's an extra mitzvah. It's a tack on. He could go anywhere he wants to say Hallel, even though it's not Makom Suda. Why is that a chiddush? For those of us who did not have Korban Pesach, you're not supposed to leave the room when you're eating, because then you have to make new brachas. You're supposed to bench before you leave. More than that, there is this issue that Rambam described in Hilchos Korban Pesach, that those who are eating Korban Pesach have to stay here, and the Korban Pesach has to stay put, and you can't mix around groups. You can't say, well, we all slaughtered one lamb together, they took half, we took half. Once you've separated and you're eating at different tables, you cannot now switch tables even. You have to stay put. Kamash Malon, once you've benched, had that 3rd cup, there's no longer this rule of no mixing. It says in the Mishnah, used to go on the roofs and sing Hallel. They only had Korban Pesach in Jerusalem, so this was the Kumsitz like thing. Well, yes, sir. Baal Tosef only applies to mitzvahs of the Torah. Here, the sages said, you know what? Have 4 cups, and if you want, have a 5th. So there's no Tosef. They're the ones who describe this. Baal Tosef only applies to mitzvah d'oraisa. That's why you actually find that mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, there usually is a form of Tosefta. You are adding to it. What's the most common mitzvah d'Rabbanan, to which sages say, you know what, if you want, you could just keep adding to it. There's more ways to do it, even me'aver what they demand. Tosefta Shabbos, that's apparently something that just means you make your Shabbos longer, but it's not a Baal Tosef. It's not another Shabbos. If you just say that I'm not going to do Malach on Friday, yeah, it's a little bit of a problem. Now, if you just say Shabbos is just starting early, that there seems to be a biblical verse that says you should be doing that, at least with Yom Kippur. Yeah, so that's not a violation of Baal Tosef. The example I'm looking for is Ner Hanukkah. It's called Ner Hanukkah because it's just Ner Ishuveso, one ornamental candle outside the house. But what did Chazal say? But if you want, you could add candles. Or you could do like Beis Hill and Beis Shammai, keep adding candles as the holiday continues. So usually with regards to rabbinic commandments, you don't find Baal Tosef. The rest of these halachas, we're familiar with them. We should read Ches, because that's a halacha that's usual every year. Okay? It says here, Makom shenagu le'echol tzali b'leilei pesachim ochelim. A place where they have this makom, they have this minhag, they eat roasted meat on Leil Pesach, so they can do that. Makom shenagu shelo le'echol ein ochlim. If they have a minhag already, don't eat roasted meat Leil Pesach, they cannot do so. It's a gzeira. Shema yomeru b'sar haPesachu. Unless they say it's a b'sar Pesach. How did the Rambam know this rule? Because of what happened with Todos. Who's Todos? That might be short for Theodoros. Theodorus, or just for short, Theodus or Thaddeus. I've seen different things. In Sonsino, they translate it 3 different ways. He was a Jew. Theodorus, it means gift of God. It's Netanyahu or Netanel or Yonatan or Elnatan. 4 different ways of saying it in Hebrew. And that's the direct translation to Latin of that name. So that was a Jew. And he was a big Jew in Rome. And at the later Second Temple times, he was actually having these Roman Jews eat roasted goats and roasted lambs on Pesach. It looked like a Korban Pesach. And they told him, if you weren't such a big shot, we would put you in Cherem for what you're doing. Mashma that some places they would forbid this practice of eating roasted lamb outside of the temple on night of Pesach. People might think it's Basar Kachim. But if they're already doing it, so there it is. This minhag is basically, I haven't found a place where they don't have such a minhag. So if you don't have Korban Pesach, don't eat roasted meat. And that brings us to basically the conclusion of this. You go down to the bottom page. We'll start with some Hilchos Korban Pesach now. Yeah, please.
Roasted meat as opposed to roasted chicken.
Yeah, roasted chicken doesn't count.
I think most people haven't been out
To eat chicken.
Eat roasted chicken.
As far as I know, that I always saw as a kid, that's dafka what we ate. They ate roasted chicken, or so they ate roasted chicken everywhere. I've heard it from rabbis also. I think if you try asking whoever, they'll say you could have roasted bird, fowl, what they call oaf in this country now.
The licensed bird is not.
It's not. So there never was such a gzera. No one will mistake a piece of roasted chicken for basar kachim, because Jews don't eat chicken or turkey or whatever it is, or pigeons outside the temple. There's no such thing. The only time you eat oaf that's sacrificial is kohanim eat achatos in the temple, and that's it. So there's no room for confusion. And you should stick to it, or eat fish. I remember. What was the chagiga? It was bovine, beef. Yeah. You remember, chagiga is just an option. Okay, let's see this line over here in the Rambam. This is taken from Korban Pesach. It's right at the beginning. The Rambam describes an essential facet over here. This is going to be a little bit lumdish, so stay with me. The Rambam says, "Ein shochatina at the Pesach ela ba'azara kishar hakodashim." You can only slaughter the Pesach in the temple courtyard, just like all the other sacrificial foods. Okay, so why do I have to tell you that? It's a sacrifice. You would have thought there must have been a havamina there was a dispensation that Korban Pesach, unlike all the other sacrifices, can be slaughtered somewhere else. Af bishaf heter abamoth lo hayu makrivin et Pesach b'mamath yachid ela b'mamath sibur. When they used to have a heter bamoth, they still would only bring the Korban Pesach on the bamat sibur and not bamat yachid. What is the Rambam talking about? What's heter bamoth and what are these two categories? So let's go into that and stop me if it's confusing. And if you know it, so I'm sorry, we'll give you a review. Heter bamoth, according to the Mishnah in Zvachim, was a temporary status in the intertemple period. It existed twice in Jewish history. The first time was when the Jewish people, actually it started a month from now. Why? You calculate. How do we know yesterday was Moshe Rabbeinu's Yersai? How do we know that? Does it say in the Torah Moshe died on the 7th day of the 12th month? No, you calculate it from Sefer Yeshua. Sefer Yeshua describes when Am Yisrael crossed the Jordan after Moshe Rabbeinu died, after they had sat Shiva for 30 days. So you work backwards. It must have been Moshe Rabbeinu passed away on the 7th of Adar. They crossed the Jordan, and it says they made camp in the Gilgal, and that's where they set up the Ohel Moed. Chazal say in the Mishnah that until they set up the Mishkan again in Shilo, for whatever reason, there was a heter bamoth. It was the same Mishkan, nothing changed. But once they were in the land, suddenly they spread out a little bit more, and there's a heter bamoth. Then it says, the entire time the Mishkan stood in Shilo, in a slightly modified form, they put walls around it. I haven't seen this, but I think this makes sense because the Mishkan was made out of boards that were coated with gold inside and out, so that someone standing outside the Mishkan saw golden walls, and someone standing inside the Mishkan also saw golden walls. And the sages say that the chiddush of this sanctuary when it was standing in Shiloh was that the walls were made out of stone. They made permanent stone walls. So what did they do with the boards that were coated with gold? It'd be a waste. No, they were on the inside. That is, these stone walls surrounded the gold on the inside. Why? Because the Rambam says a mitzvah, and this is what history indicates, it's a mitzvah to try to overlay the entire temple with gold inside and out. Just like the Mishkan, just like Solomon made the inside of the first temple gold, and just like even in later Second Temple times, there was a running contribution to the Parochas fund so that they could coat the entire Holy of Holies with gold. And that's what they were doing. Every now and then, they'd add more gold to it. Okay, so that's the way the Mishkan stood. And after Shiloh was destroyed, they were able to evacuate the Mishkan. All they left was, those stone walls, but they evacuated all the essential pieces of the Mishkan, set the Mishkan up in Nov, and from then on, the Heter Bamos came back. And this is something that I've been personally arguing with some of the rabbis at Merkaz Rav, because there's later books describe this in a way that's not described by the Yerushalmi and doesn't fit with the way the Rambam describes in Perish HaMishnayos, which is that this idea of Heter Bamoth was a limud from the Pasuk. That is, the Nevi'im at the time told them that they could do this. Originally, they were told, when there was a Mishkan, bring all your sacrifice here. There's but one altar. And then when they were in the land, the time of Joshua, they're conquering the land and dividing up the land. Those 14 years before they set up the Mishkan in Shiloh, they were allowed to build their own private altars. That's called a Bamat Yachid, and offer sacrifice there, just like the patriarchs had done back in the day. And somehow, after Shiloh was destroyed, the leader of the Jewish people back then was Shmuel HaNavi, he demonstrated himself that there is once again this allowance. They can build altars wherever they want and offer sacrifice thereon. You don't need Kohanim. You don't need a kior. You don't need anything. Just an altar and an animal and kosher Jews to offer sacrifice. And we see that the greatest men at the time did that. Who offered on a bama? We see Shmuel HaNavi did it. Saul did it. King David did it. Solomon did it. That's what they used to do until the temple was built in Jerusalem, and then Heter Bamot never came back again. According to the calculation, which is disputed by some Rishonim, this Heter Bamot was in existence for 57 years. the entire time between the destruction of Shiloh and the building of the first temple. So Heter Bamot basically existed in Jewish history for 71 years, according to the way the Mishnah has it. 71 years divided into 14 to 57, there was this issue of Heter Bamot. And the Jewish people actually had a hard time getting used to this. Because they had Heter Bamot for well more than a generation, the Navi says repeatedly I guess, almost 30 or so times, Am Yisrael is criticized in the Book of Kings for having Bamot. Okay, more than 30 times in the Book of Kings, you have this issue. Every king of Judah judged, did he get rid of the Bamot? Because there was a temple, and there were people who were still offering sacrifice to God, not idolatry, but they had Bamot. And the northern kingdom of Israel, that was Yerovam ben Nevat's whole Chiddush. What did Yerovam ben Nevat say? I don't want you going to the temple in Jerusalem. Here, there's Beit Bamot in Beit El and in Dan. You could have your altar over here. That's a rival to the temple, and that existed for a few centuries. And every king of Israel was guilty of that. So the Navi criticized Am Yisrael, well, like I said, well more than 30 times for allowing Bamot. Because Am Yisrael had this at one point, and it took them a long time to get used to just having bought one Mizbeach. It's a little bit of a stretch to tell people that. In the old days, they used to build altars all the time, and the idolaters also did that. So it took us a long time to get used to this. And I think Rav Shakeh also, when he came to conquer Jerusalem, he failed. He was the Assyrian general, because I'll say he was a Meshumid. That was one of his complaints. He made fun of King Chizkiyahu. How's he supposed to save you? How's your God supposed to save you? You destroyed all your God's altars, and all you have is one altar left. Your God would be more powerful if you gave him more altars. No, Kamash Milan, you're not supposed to have it. So that's the Heter Bamot. The Rambam here is giving us a little bit of a surprise. Why? Because the Rambam does not discuss Bamot anywhere in the Mishnah Torah. It's in the Parashat Mishnayos because he has to describe the Mishnayos. But the Rambam's rules are, we only stick with what is practical. The Beis HaMikdash has been built, the Bamot are not supposed to come back. So the Rambam makes no reference in the entire Sefer Avodah, for example, to the status that existed before the temple was built. He talks about the history of where the temple stood, but he does not mention that once upon a time there was a Heter Bamot, even though this is something that's discussed in the Mishnah, in the Tosefta, and in the Talmud in a number of places. It is only here in the Mishnah Torah that the Rambam says, even when they had a Heter Bamot, David HaMelech's time and King Saul's time, they were not supposed to be bringing Korban Pesach except the central Bamat Tzibur, which, by the way, was the altar that stood right outside the Mishkan. That's called the Bamat Tzibur or the Bama Gedolah, various names. Why was it called Bama Gedolah? I sent to Rabbi Shendorfi, I said, because the pasuk in Sefer Malachim, it used to be the Mishkan was flat. The Mishkan used to sit in the middle of the Israelite camp, wherever it was. Gilgal is not a mountaintop. Gilgal is just a plain. And if you've been to the place where the Mishkan stood in Shiloh, where is it? It's not on top of a mountain. It's actually on a recess there where the hill is coming down, but there's a flat area before you get really down into the valley. There was no commandment to put the Mishkan or the Olam Moed on a higher point. It is only when they got to Giv'on, the last stop before Jerusalem. Giv'on was a high place. Giv'on is actually quite well elevated, and they called that the Bama Gedolah in Giv'on because that was the first time they said, hey, it's good to put the Mishkan on top of a mountain. It actually has a certain aesthetic to it, and that's what they repeated. So that's why the temple stood at the top of Mount Moriah, not such a high mountain, but it stands at the top of that mountain there. Okay. Umisha makrivo b'b'mat yachid. A person who did haya makrivo, past tense, he brought this Korban Pesach on a private altar, or bama, high place, lokeh. He was to be lashed. Ke'ilu hikrivo bashuk. It's as though he made a korban in the marketplace. Shnemar lo tuchal lizboach et pasach be'achad she'arecha. The Torah says at the end of Parshas Re'eh, you shall not be able to offer the Passover in one of your gates. That means in some place outside Jerusalem, in a different city. Mi pia Shmuel lamdu shezo asarad lashochet b'mat yachid afilu bishat heter bamot. The Rambam is saying this throughout Parshas Re'eh. We have the introduction of shchitat chutz. Shchitat chutz is the prohibition of offering sacrifice outside of the temple. The Torah says, "Take your korban to the place that God shall choose." So already have this prohibition. The Chiddush at the end of the parsha says, and Korban Pesach also has to be done in front of God. It teaches that even when they had a bama, and you could have brought your other sacrifice away from God, so to speak, anywhere you wanted, Korban Pesach still had to be brought where God said so. It's still a public sacrifice. So that's very important. The Sefer HaChinuch, he says that this is an Isser. Okay, what?
So where was this public sacrifice?
No, the public bama
Yeah.
just meant to the Mishkan, where it stood.
But there was a time, there's no Mishkan.
No, they always had a Mishkan.
Ah.
So that's also an important point. The Jews didn't go, this is a lesson lost on us. In the pre-temple times, let's say when Shiloh was destroyed, it was a war with the Philistines, they destroyed the city also. The Kohanim evacuated the Mishkan right beforehand and brought it to Nov.
Ah.
So maybe they missed a day, but the Kohanim were charged making sure that the sacrifice would continue. What did Chazal say? There's a machlokas there, and I think it's Brachos or Shabbos. What's the most important verse in the Torah? You ever see? Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Shema Yisrael. What? What's the bottom line that Gemara? The most important verse in the Torah. Constancy. You got to offer the Korban Tamid in the morning and the Korban Tamid at night. Matter of fact, Korban Tamid started even before they built the Mishkan. It's Olas Tamid, Hasiyah Har Sinai. They were offering the Tamid even before the Mishkan was built, even before their Kohanim. The Mishnah says that from the time of the revelation at Sinai, Moses built an altar right then and there. And who was offering sacrifice? Who brought the lambs in the morning and the lamb in the afternoon? The firstborn. It was different rules, different set of rules. So firstborn's changed. Trivia question for the kids. It says in the Mishnah there that the day they inaugurated the Mishkan, suddenly the Kohanim became in charge. No more 22,000 firstborn offering sacrifice, just 5 men, all from one family. So it was a major downgrade in manpower. Who's the only person whose status did not change that day?
Aaron.
No, Aaron was not a firstborn, so he became a Kohen. Before that, Aaron never offered sacrifice. He had an older sister. Yeah, Miriam was significantly older than Aaron by our calculations. Okay, according to the Medrash, she must have been about 10 years older than Moshe Rabbeinu or so. Yeah. Okay, so you're close. Who? I need someone else. You're close to the answer. One Jew in the entire world whose status did not change that day. No, Yehuda was dead. Okay, give 3. No, Moshe Rabbeinu was not a firstborn and did not become a Kohen. He was a Levi. Okay. No, Yisro was a ger. Here's the answer. Ready? No, Nadav.
Oh, no,
It says Habachor Nadav. Aaron's firstborn son was Nadav. Before the whole Mishkan thing, Nadav was a firstborn, so he was involved in the sacrifice. The day after, he became one of the Kohanim. So his status did not change. His brother Avihu suddenly became a Kohen. He was number 2. It says Mishnehu, Avihu. The number 2 was Avihu. So he became a Kohen. And so did the younger brothers. But before that, they didn't. Nadav was the only one who rightfully so had the right to think, you know what, I've been put in a situation, all the Bechoros have been rejected, but I'm a Kohen, and I'm first in line to be the next Kohen Gadol. And I'm always mentioned right after Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron, and Nadav. So you could understand why it is he would have thought that it was appropriate for him to do what he then went and did. I mean, who else was supposed to offer this Ketores? He had an uncle who offered Ketores, but his uncle couldn't actually bring it to the Mishkan, but he couldn't do it. So who else was supposed to do it if not him? Okay, it was totally made a lot of sense actually. The Sefer HaChinuch says that this Isser of offering Korban Pesach on a bama is a lav. It counts in the list of thou shalt nots. There's 365 thou shalt nots. How many different opinions are there about this list? I don't know. There's about 10 major lists of mitzvahs. None of them agree with each other. There's some big ones on the list, but this is a whole, you can make a doctorate, how to count the mitzvahs. The Rambam attempted to count the mitzvahs. And of course, he wasn't the first one to do it. He was already disagreeing with those who came before him. And after the Rambam put out his book, lo and behold, there were those who disagreed with the Rambam about how to make this list. Most famously, the Ramban, who adjusts the Rambam's list, right? So the Sefer HaChinuch also has its list of mitzvahs. One of the mitzvahs on the list that the Rambam does not have is the thou shalt not of offering Korban Pesach on a bama. So the question is, why did Rambam leave this off the list? So I could explain the Rambam, but the Sefer HaChinuch is looking into this. And then there's the Minchas Chinuch. What's the Minchas Chinuch? A commentary on the Sefer HaChinuch. What? Yeah, and it's much later. And the Minchas Chinuch is less a commentary on the Sefer HaChinuch and more like just discussions of Maimonidean halacha. So it's a very good brisker Sefer. Rabbi Bronspiegel used to love talking about the Minchas Chinuch. He was the one who introduced us to the Minchas Chinuch. So this is little Rabbi Bronspiegel type Torah. Okay, in his memory. The Rambam says, "Harambam v'chol monei mitzvot lo manu zeh l'lav b'fnei atzmo." The Maimonides does not put in this prohibition as its own one on the list. Okay, it doesn't make the big list. The chule. My dahavi havi. What is in the past is in the past. Heter bamos not coming back. Uvamos lo yutiru b'shum zman. If there's no real vav in the word yutar, there's a dot in the tuf. It's yutiru. It's supposed to be a kubutz. That means they will not become permitted anymore. If you write it with an actual vav, it would be yiwatharu, means they will be left over, like nosar. Okay. The Adua, the Rambam eno kotev mashe eno nafkamina klal. The Rambam normally doesn't bring in the Mishnah Torah that which there's no nafkamina. There's no nafkamina now for this. So why do you write it? Ella bivadai sover gamkein hashochet pesach achutz chutz mishum lav deshchitas chutz lo ke mishum lav ze gamkein. The Minchas Chinuch learns from here that if a person were to offer Korban Pesach, like someone suggested, why can't you just do it at the kotel? You can't go to the Har Bayis, so do it at the kotel, because you're not allowed to do sacrifice at the kotel. Right? I say that, well, whatever. You're not supposed to do it there. The Minchas Chinuch suggests that the fact that the Rambam brings this specific prohibition with regards to the Pesach offering, it must be that if one were to perform the Korban Pesach outside the temple, he'd be violating two isurim: the general prohibition against shchitas chutz, plus the prohibition of Pesach chutz, if there's such a thing. Ufi aniyuta ti adraba, but I feel it's on the contrary. Sarich yun al harambam kevan dehu lav hanoheg lama lo mana'oto lelav b'fnei atzmo. If this is the pshat, the Rambam would say it has to get lashed twice for doing this. Then the Rambam should have put this as its own separate prohibition on the list. That's another rule. If Rambam says persons to be lashed twice, it means he violated two prohibitions on the list. That is the kasha. For those who have it in red, I put it here. That's the kasha of the Minchas Chinuch. So Rav Kapach has an answer over here. That's in blue. That's the next paragraph. Who is Rav Kapach? He was Yemenite. Rav Kapach is an authority on the Rambam. Rabbi Rabinovich is also an authority of the Rambam. Not everything Rav Kapach says, though, is 100%. There's later things that we found that, like there's new girsas of the Rambam, or even we have the signature of the Rambam. That's not the way it is. You learn a brisker Torah in yeshiva, say the Rambam holds like this and that. There's a good idea. Then you find Ksav Yad with the actual Rambam signature on it. Oh, the girsa is wrong. The Rambam really said this. There's no kasha. The whole explanation falls away. And then they say, what does the Rambam know about learning Rambam? What do you do? Okay, there you go. V'nir l'ri Kapach. The Rav Kapach said, "Sha'ita lifnei aminchas chinuch girsas Vilna hamishubeshes." The Rav Kapach, the Minchas Chinuch was working with the classic printing, the Vilna print of the Rambam. We also use Vilna Gemaras, but even those are censored, or there's all these problems. I read to you the Machon Mamre version of the Rambam, which is based on the Ksav Yad, the actual manuscripts, the signed ones by the Rambam, of which there are a few still among us. So if you use the old Vilna printing, there's a few mistakes and even things missing. So if you read it, Ba Katuv v'chol hamakriv et haPesach b'vat yachid. Present tense. Whoever brings Korban Pesach on a Bamis Yachid is hit with a prohibition. Va'isr b'hoveh. Okay, it's written in present tense. Aval lefia girsa hameduyeket shel Rambam hamuvet kan. That's so kol shehaya makriv. Whoever used to bring it then. Okay. Hamuvet kan borur she'Rambam rak katav al ha'avar. The Rambam's just describing history, what is in the past. Umi shahaya makrivo bishat heter abamot. No kasha anymore of the Minchas Chinuch. Minchas Chinuch just had a bad gears of the Rambam. This is a cheap answer, but it's the truth. A lot of times you have, like, I remember the only reason why I came to be involved in all this was it's now 13 years ago or so. I was on the bus and I had my Vilna Rambam. Why do you have a Vilna Rambam? It has all the commentaries. There's a bomb kasha of the Ravid there. Why did the Rambam say this? It doesn't make any sense. So I went to Rabbi Rabinovich's son. And I showed him, look, how do you answer the Rambam? Well, no, Rabbi Rabinovich was Rabbi Lechem Rabinovich.
Yes.
And his son, yeah, well, you call him Mati. I'm thinking Mordechai. I want to call him Mati.
I know.
Okay. Yeah, okay, fine. I know him as a man my father's age with the beard and the hadras, hadras punim and and shoulders. Oh, really? Okay. So So he introduced me to his father's editions of the Rambam, in which there is no problem, like just like this. So that's the answer. And then we have another kasha, which is red, the second kasha. V'avadai lanu darush hesper lama hivya Rambam rak din echad legabe habamos bizman haeter. This is the one time when the Rambam describes. By the way, in Shas Heter Bamas, there was an isser to bring Korban Pesach there. The Rambam could have told us in Mishnah Torah other issues that existed. B'Shas Heter Bamas, you had to have a person who was ritually pure but did not have to wear big day kahuna. The Rambam mentions none of the halachas that used to be in existence then, even though there's actually some fascinating sugyas there and gemaras about this. It's a whole few daf in Zvachim, the difference between what existed in Heter Bamas time and what changed, right? But this is the only time the Rambam mentions it, la halacha. Why? Why of all the times does Rambam mention this? If we look in the parsha, Niresha pasuk lo tuchal isboach nemar dafka bisman isra bamos hainu bisman abayis. There's another problem. This pasuk the Rambam says bisman heter bamis, they weren't supposed to bring korban pesach at a bama. Even though there's heter bamis, yesterday you brought korban on the bama, tomorrow you're going to pesach you can't. That pasuk is talking about dafka the time of the mikdash. It says, go to the place that God shall choose, and there do the korban pesach, and don't do it in the chad sharecha. It's talking about zman hamikdash. It also says, ufanisa baboker v'achtalo alecha. You after the day after korban pesach, go home, which is a halacha of lina. What's the halacha of lina? That whenever you bring sacrifice to the temple, you have to stay overnight in Jerusalem. Because I'll learn the whole concept of lina with regards to all the other korbanos from the example of Pesach. So this pasuk in context is not referring to a time of Heter Bamas, yet the Rambam uses it to describe something existing in time of Heter Bamas. And Rambam's even talking about Heter Bamas, which is irrelevant for his entire Mishnah Torah, which never mentions Heter Bamas at all. Okay, you understand the kasha? Okay, we should see an answer to this before we break, because it's not good to have cliffhangers. We'll try to answer all the kashas. This is a good question. The whole parshas Re'ei Kula, Dibra al Yichud HaMakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the Isser Shchitas Chutz. The entire Parshas Re'eh until that point mentions a number of times the Isser Shchitas Chutz, and this expression, the place that God shall choose, actually starts in Parshas Re'eh and continues. How many times does it appear in Parshas Re'eh? Many times. And it continues into the next Parsha. That's also where you go to ask Shilas. When you have a question, in Parshas Shoftim, the next one, what does it say? If you don't know the answer to a question, what do? Get up and go and ask the Zakanim and the Dayanim who will be in the place that God shall choose. Ask the Sanhedrin. Okay. V'zavachta Pesach Hashem Alkecha Tzun Vakar B'makom Asher Yivchar Hashem L'shakein Shemo Sham. You shall sacrifice in the place that God shall choose to domicile His name. There, right? Lo tuchal isboch as a pasach b'achad she'arecha, and you can't. Leo Davids, he's one of ours. Okay. Yeah, you can't do it anywhere else you want to. Asher Hashem Alkecha noten lecha kim al makom asher yivchar Hashem Alkecha l'shakein shemo sham sham tizbach as a pesach. This whole prohibition is describing the time when there's a temple. The chassid for Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch gives an answer. Afal pi she'isser shchitas chutz ne'amar b'kvar. Even though we've had an isser shchitas chutz throughout the parsha, it says don't bring sacrifice outside the temple. Hayat tzorech lachazor b'ferush al ha'isur hazeh b'yachas lekorban pesach. With regards to korban pesach, you have to say this. Even in the time of Beis Hamikdash, and there's no bumas. Thank God people have gotten used to this. There's no bumas. First temple times, problem, they had bumas throughout the history, and there was the trouble the kings had. Can they stamp out the Savera? Second temple times, Jews were not doing the Savera, thank God. So he says here, Sharia Pesach, hu ha-korban, ha-mechonen tabayit, ve'et ha-mishpacha. Korban Pesach is the korban that is lechonen. What is lechonen? Lechonen bekodshenu. Well, it's not just intended. Lechonen means it prepares everybody, but in a sacrificial manner, and the family. Rav Hirsch is encoding in here a great idea. I remember stumbling upon this. The Netziv also mentions this idea, but you would find this in the whole act of Korban Pesach in the house. The Rav Hirsch is describing saying here. We'll read it inside. I'll say it outside. Korban Pesach is a korban that in which everybody has to participate. When a man brings any other sacrifice, his wife doesn't have to bring sacrifice. He just has a mitzvah on the yontif to share some with his wife. She's not obligated like he is. And the man is obligated to share with the people who have less. The children don't have to. The slaves do not have to. Every Kanani and a Shifka Kanani, of course, don't have to. But Korban Pesach, everybody has to have. Man, women, children not, because they're not bar mitzvah. But it used to be that a status of Eved Kanani and Shifka Kanani, who are also Jews, by the way. It's just an expression called Eved Kanani. And Eved Kanani is sort of like a convert to Judaism, but he is not obligated in all the commandments. So he doesn't wear tefillin. And there's a Jewish man to whom he is an Eved, who technically speaking, he has to serve. But nowadays, slavery is forbidden by law. So if you have an Eved Kanani around, you'd have to let him work what he wants. You couldn't enslave him, but you still have a halachic status. And he has laws of marriage that are unique to him. And until you emancipate him, he does not, let's say, wear tefillin or count for a minyan or study Torah and do other things that, let's say, women wouldn't do. So it turns out that everybody is obligated for Pesach. And you have to involve your children in this. Not only that, minui. We're talking about everybody has to be involved in this. But not only that, there's a whole slew of halachot, which I've included in introduction to Haggadah Pesach, that, and this is a whole piece of work you could go into. Everything about Korban Pesach makes it that the dinim that are unique to Korban Pesach all match the special halachot that Kohanim have to observe when eating sacrificial meat in the temple. I'll just give one example. It told Am Yisrael were told at the time of the first Passover in Egypt, stay in your house until the morning. Vatem lo tetzeu ish mipetach beito ad haboker. No leaving until morning. The firstborn were killed when? Right at midnight. Sometime later, Pharaoh actually came and drove them out. So it says the Egyptians were pushing them out. But they were told, wait a minute, even though it's 4 o'clock in the morning, no one's dying anymore. The Egyptians are out in the street screaming. They're kicking us out of Egypt. The Israelites were told, stay in your house until morning. Is it danger? No, it's not danger. God already protected them. God could protect. He says you have to stay in your house until morning. Why would they have the specific obligation to stay in their house? Like it's a mitzvah. The answer, because of Lina. The place where they had the Korban Pesach in their hovels, inside their house, that was where they ate the sacrificial food. So just like when you have sacrifice in Jerusalem, you have to stay overnight in Jerusalem. And the Kohanim who are on duty, where do they sleep? The Kohanim who are on duty that week in the Beis HaMikdash, do they go home? Do they go to a hotel in Jerusalem? Where do they go? They sleep on Har Bayis. They sleep in the Beis HaMoked, right next to the Azara. They don't go home. So too, when you eat Korban Pesach, the very first time in Egypt, you stay put in your house because the house has become like a temple. Where you had Korban Pesach, that's a temple. You're all like Kohanim. And God willing, after break, we'll see. If you want to see more halachas, we're going to live a guzzle, but perhaps we could just go through in the list and see every single halacha that's unique to Korban Pesach has its parallel in a din that applies to Kohanim with other kachim. And this doesn't exist for any other korban. So that's what Rav Hirsch is saying. It's the korban that makes every house into a mikdash, and it turns every Jew, even to the lowliest slave woman Jew to the richest Jew and the greatest chacham, into a kohen. And that's why there's a special commandment, specifically, don't do Korban Pesach outside the temple. Why? You would have thought because Korban Pesach turns your particular house into a temple, and it turns everybody who eats the Korban into a Kohen temporarily, you could offer it wherever you want to. Kamash Balan, you should not. So we'll take the break there.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.